The wind had a way of talking on the high plains, whispering through fence wire and dry grass like it remembered every lonely soul who had ever stood there. On a morning washed pale by dust and sunrise, the rancher stood at the edge of his land and listened, hands rough from years of work, heart quieter than the country around him. He had lived alone so long that silence felt like another chore, something to shoulder and carry from day to day. Folks in town said a man could get used to anything, but they never said what it cost him. He had come into town for feed and nails, nothing more. The trip itself felt like a mistake the moment he tied his horse outside the general store. Towns made him uneasy, too many eyes, too many voices asking questions he did not want to answer. Inside, the smell of whiskey clung to the air even though it was barely past morning. Near the back, by the hitching post where men sometimes traded stock, a thin argument was rising and falling like a bad tune. A drunk man was waving his arms, slurring promises to anyone who would listen. Beside him stood a young woman, still as a fence post, her eyes fixed on the dirt. She did not flinch when the man shouted. She did not react when others laughed. Someone muttered that she could not hear. Someone else said the man was her father and that he was looking to sell her work to pay his debts. The word sell carried an ugly weight, and the rancher felt it settle in his chest like a stone. He tried to turn away. None of it was his concern. He had learned long ago that stepping into other people's trouble only made your own life harder. Still, something held him there. Maybe it was the way the young woman's hands were clenched, knuckles white, as if she were holding on to the last thing she owned. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, not empty as people claimed, but sharp and watchful, like an animal that had learned not to show fear. The drunk man noticed the rancher's gaze and staggered closer, grinning through broken teeth. He talked fast, words tumbling over each other, offering a bargain that sounded more like a plea. He said the girl was strong, that she worked hard, that she would not talk back because she could not hear a thing. He laughed at his own joke. The rancher did not smile. He asked simple questions. Was she grown? Could she work? Would there be papers to make it right? The man waved him off, saying papers cost money. The rancher's jaw tightened. He had no wish to own another human being. He did know what happened to people left with men like that. The law was thin out here, stretched across miles of dirt and promise. Sometimes the only justice came from a choice made in the moment. The girl lifted her head then, just a little. Her eyes met the rancher's. For a breath of time the noise around them seemed to fade. He could not explain what passed between them, only that it felt like being seen after years of being invisible. He spoke slowly, carefully, as if his words might matter even if she could not hear them. He told the drunk man he would pay, but only for a year of honest work and only if the girl agreed. The drunk man scoffed, but hunger won out over pride. He shoved a rough paper across the counter, marked with ink and grease. The rancher counted out the money, each coin heavy with doubt. He knelt, then, bringing himself level with the girl. He did not reach for her, he simply waited. After a moment she nodded once, small and firm. That nod carried more weight than any signature. The ride back to the ranch was quiet except for the creak of leather and the wind. The girl sat straight, hands folded in her lap, eyes taking in the wide land as if she were memorizing it. The rancher wondered what she saw. Freedom or another kind of cage? He wondered what right he had to bring her there at all. The road stretched on, dust rising behind them like the past trying to follow. Life on the ranch settled into a careful rhythm. The girl worked hard, just as promised. She learned the lay of the land quickly, moving through the chores with a steady grace. She spoke little, using gestures and looks that said more than words ever could. The rancher found himself talking anyway, narrating the day as he worked, not because he expected an answer, but because the sound of a human voice kept the loneliness at bay. At night, he would sit on the porch, watching the sun sink low and red. Sometimes the girl would sit a few steps away, her face turned toward the fading light. Once, without thinking, he spoke her name as it was written on the paper. Her head turned sharply. She looked straight at him, eyes wide. He felt his breath catch. He tried again, quieter this time. The same thing happened. Her gaze locked onto his mouth, not his eyes, as if she were reading the shape of the word. A shiver ran through him. He clapped his hand softly behind her. She did not react. He dragged a chair across the boards. Nothing. Yet when he spoke her name, when he spoke slowly and clear, she responded every time. The idea took root in his mind, unwelcome and impossible. He told himself it was nothing, a coincidence. Still, he began to test it, careful not to frighten her. He spoke when she was near. He watched her eyes, the tilt of her head. He noticed how she seemed to feel vibrations through the floor, how her fingers brushed the table when he talked, how her attention sharpened when his voice carried emotion. One evening, a storm rolled in fast, thunder breaking open the sky. The girl startled when the first crack hit, dropping the bucket she carried. Water splashed over the dirt. The rancher rushed to her side, calling out without thinking. She looked up at him, fear clear on her face, and then something else, recognition. She reached out, her hand pressing against his chest, right over his heart. He stood frozen, rain soaking them both, heart pounding so hard he was sure she could feel it. In that moment, he understood that whatever was happening between them was bigger than a misunderstanding. It was a truth that could change everything. If she could hear him in a way no one else had noticed, then the world had failed her in ways he could barely imagine. The storm passed, leaving the air clean and sharp. They went inside, both shaken. The rancher lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, questions circling like restless horses. What did it mean? What would the law say? What danger would come if others found out? He thought of the drunk man in town, of the paper with its crooked ink. He thought of the way the girl had trusted him without knowing why. Morning came too soon. As the sun rose, a rider appeared on the far fence line, a dark shape against the light. The rancher felt a cold pull in his gut. The past had a way of riding back when you least expected it. He stepped onto the porch, eyes narrowed as the rider drew closer. Behind him, inside the house, the girl stood in the doorway, watching his lips move as he whispered a single word meant only for her, a word that might decide what came next. The rider slowed near the fence, dust curling around the horse's legs. He wore a hat pulled low and a coat too heavy for the season, as if he were carrying more than the weather required. The rancher did not wave. He waited, hands resting at his sides, mind turning over every reason a stranger might come riding up this far from town. Trouble rarely announced itself with clear words. It showed up quiet, looking ordinary, and asked to be let in. The horse stopped short of the gate. The rider looked past the rancher toward the house, eyes lingering a moment too long. That look set the rancher's nerves on edge. He stepped forward, blocking the view without making it obvious. When he spoke, his voice was calm, the way it got when he was bracing for something he could not yet see. The rider said he was passing through, asking after water and news. His words were polite, but his eyes kept drifting back. The rancher answered in short lines. There was water by the trough. News was thin out here. He asked what business the rider had. The man shrugged and said he had heard of a place where work might be found. He said he was asking around. From the doorway, the girl watched every movement. She could not hear the exchange, yet she followed it closely, reading the tension in their shoulders, the pauses between words. When the rider glanced her way again, her hand tightened on the doorframe. The rancher caught it and felt a spark of anger he did not expect. It surprised him how quickly the feeling rose, sharp and protective. He told the rider there was no work to spare. He said it plainly. The rider smiled thinly, thanked him, and tipped his hat. The horse turned, hoofs thudding away. The rancher waited until the dust settled before he let out the breath he had been holding. He did not turn around right away. He needed a moment to think. Inside, the girl had already moved back from the doorway. She stood by the table, fingers pressed flat against the wood. When he entered, he spoke softly, more to steady himself than anything else. He told her the rider was gone. He watched her eyes. They lifted to his mouth, following each word. Relief crossed her face, quick and honest. That night, the rancher found himself thinking about the past he had tried to leave buried. He had come west after a war and a family he no longer spoke of. The land had been his answer to too many questions. Work kept his hands busy. Silence kept his thoughts from cutting too deep. Bringing the girl here had changed that balance. The quiet was no longer empty. It was waiting. Over the next days, small signs kept piling up. When he spoke near her, she responded in ways that could not be chance. She did not hear the bark of the dog or the crack of a board, but she caught his words when he stood close, when his voice carried warmth or worry. Once, when he spoke from behind her, she turned as if pulled by a string. Another time she frowned when he whispered, as if straining to catch meaning rather than sound. He tried to make sense of it without frightening her. He remembered stories of folks who felt sound through touch, through vibration and breath. He wondered if that was what she had learned to do to survive. The thought made his chest ache. How many times had she been shouted at, struck for not answering a call she could not hear? How many times had she learned to read lips in secret, piecing together a world that did not wait for her? He began to teach her signs he made up on the spot, simple gestures for work and rest. She learned fast, adding her own motions, turning their days into a quiet language that belonged only to them. It felt right and dangerous all at once. The more they understood each other, the harder it became to pretend nothing was different. One afternoon, a wagon rolled by on the distant road, headed toward town. The rancher watched it until it disappeared. He thought about how thin the line was between safety and notice. If word got around that the girl was not as deaf as claimed, questions would follow. Questions led to papers, and papers laid back to the drunk man who had signed her away without care. The law might see the contract as binding. The law rarely cared how it came to be. He decided to ride into town alone the next day, leaving the girl with clear instructions to stay near the house. She watched him prepare, worry etched into her face. He spoke gently, explaining where he was going and why. She nodded, though he could tell she did not like it. Before he mounted, she reached out and caught his sleeve. Her fingers trembled. She pressed her hand to her ear, then to his chest, then shook her head. He swallowed hard, understanding enough to feel the weight of it. Town was louder than ever when he arrived. He kept his head down, speaking only when needed. At the store he listened for rumors. He heard talk of a drunk man stirring up trouble, claiming he had been cheated. He heard talk of a rider asking after a young woman taken to a ranch. Each word tightened the knot in his gut. He bought what he needed and left before anyone could ask too many questions. The ride back felt longer than usual. When the ranch finally came into view, relief washed over him, followed by dread. He scanned the land for any sign of movement that did not belong. The house stood quiet, too quiet. He dismounted fast, calling out even though he knew she would not hear him from that distance. He rushed inside, heart pounding. She was there, safe, sitting by the window. She looked up and smiled, a small thing that loosened his chest. He spoke her name, and she answered with that same sharp attention. For a moment, the world felt steady again. As evening fell, they sat together at the table, sharing a simple meal. He told her about town, about the way trouble moved like a shadow. He did not hide his concern. She listened, eyes steady, and then she surprised him by standing and going to the door. She pointed to the horizon, then to herself, then shook her head. He realized she was telling him she would not run. Whatever came, she would face it here. The choice both comforted and scared him. He had not meant to tie her fate so closely to his own. Yet there it was, plain as the land outside. The rider from before returned to his thoughts. The look in the man's eyes had not been the look of someone seeking work. It had been the look of someone counting. Later that night, as the moon rose and painted the yard silver, the rancher heard a sound he could not place at first. A faint rhythm, distant but steady, hooves more than one. He stood slowly, every sense awake. He spoke her name once, quiet and urgent. She was already on her feet, watching his lips, fear and resolve mixing in her gaze. He moved to the window and peered out. Shapes gathered at the edge of the land, just beyond the reach of the moonlight. He could not see faces, only outlines and horses shifting their weight. The past had found him after all. He turned back to the girl, wanting to say everything at once, wanting to promise safety when he did not yet know how to give it. He took her hand, pressed it to his chest so she could feel his heart racing, and hoped she understood that whatever came next, he would not let her face it alone. The figures at the edge of the land did not rush in. They lingered, as if testing the ground, as if waiting for a signal only they could see. The rancher kept his hand wrapped around the girl's, feeling the quick pulse beneath her skin. He guided her away from the window and toward the back of the house, where the walls were thicker and the light did not spill so easily. He spoke low and steady, shaping each word with care. He told her to stay close. He told her he would handle the talking. Outside, a horse snorted, leather creaked. Someone cleared a throat. The sound carried across the yard, plain and deliberate. The rancher stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him with a soft click. He kept his posture easy, shoulders loose, the way men did when they wanted to look harmless. The moonlight showed 2 riders now, maybe 3, their hats shadowing their faces. One of them spoke, calling out the rancher's name as if they were old friends. The voice had a town sound to it, practiced and smooth. The rancher answered, asking what business brought them so late. The man said they were looking for a girl. He said it like a question dressed up as a statement. He said a father was worried. He said papers existed. The rancher felt anger stir, but he kept it buried. He said the land was private. He said no one was missing here. He watched their hands, the way they rested near reins and belts. He knew better than to think this was only talk. The riders exchanged glances. One of them shifted in the saddle, impatient. From inside, the girl stood with her back against the wall, eyes fixed on the door. She could not hear the words, but she felt the tension through the boards, through the air itself. She remembered nights when men argued over her like livestock, their voices rising and falling while she stared at the floor. She remembered learning to read mouths because it was safer than asking for mercy. Her fingers brushed the table, grounding herself in the solid feel of it. The lead rider said they would come back with the law if needed. He said it calmly as if offering a kindness. The rancher said he would be here. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply stood, a quiet line drawn in the dirt. After a long moment, the riders turned away, hooves thudding as they retreated into the dark. The rancher stayed on the porch until the night swallowed them. When he went back inside, the girl was waiting. He spoke her name, relief softening his face. She stepped forward and pressed her palm to his chest again, feeling the slowing beat. He nodded, letting her know they were safe for now. Sleep did not come easy. The rancher lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the encounter. He knew what threats sounded like when dressed as courtesy. He knew the law could be bent by the right hands. By morning, he had decided he would not sit and wait. He would prepare. At dawn, he saddled the horse and rode the fence line, checking posts and gates. The girl followed on foot where she could, watching him work, mirroring his movements when he showed her how to set a latch or stack wood closer to the house. Their quiet language grew, built from glances and gestures, from shared work and shared worry. Each task felt like a promise made without words. In town, another story was unfolding. The drunk man had sobered enough to remember the money was gone and the bottle was empty. He complained loud and often, painting himself as wronged. He found sympathy among those who liked a simple tale of loss. A hired hand with a sharp nose for trouble listened and passed the story along. By the time the tale reached the sheriff, it had grown teeth. The sheriff was a careful man, stretched thin by distance and duty. He did not like papers that smelled of drink and desperation. He also did not like ranchers who kept to themselves and asked few questions. He set the matter aside, meaning to look into it when time allowed. Time, however, had a way of being pushed. Back at the ranch, the girl noticed changes in the rancher. He moved with purpose, his eyes always scanning. She tried to help, bringing water, steadying boards, offering her quiet presence. She watched his mouth closely when he spoke, catching words like law and papers and town. The meaning gathered in her chest like a storm. One afternoon, she surprised him by writing on a scrap of paper. The letters were careful and uneven, learned the hard way. She wrote that she did not belong to anyone. She wrote that she worked here by choice. She wrote that she would tell anyone who asked. He read the words twice, then folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket like something precious. He wanted to believe words could hold a line. A day later, a different rider came, alone and slow. This one wore a star that caught the sun. The rancher met him halfway, keeping the house behind him. The sheriff dismounted, eyes taking in the land, the fences, the quiet strength of the place. He asked to speak inside. The rancher hesitated, then agreed. The girl stood near the window as they talked. She watched lips move, catching pieces. The sheriff asked about the contract. The rancher explained his understanding, his intent, his offer of honest work and safety. The sheriff's mouth tightened. He said intent mattered, but papers mattered too. He said a father's claim carried weight, even when the father was a mess. The rancher felt the ground shift under him. He spoke plainly, refusing to paint himself as a savior or a villain. He said he would not hand her over. He said the land was his responsibility, and so was anyone under his roof. The sheriff looked at the girl then, really looked at her steady gaze and calm posture. He asked her a question. She watched his mouth, heart pounding. She understood enough to know he was asking if she wanted to stay. She nodded, then shook her head, then pointed to herself in the house and pressed her hand to her chest. She took the paper from the rancher's pocket and held it out. The sheriff read it slowly. The lawman sighed, rubbing his jaw. He said the matter would not end here. He said there were men in town who would push it. He said he would do what he could, but his reach had limits. He mounted up and rode away, leaving a trail of dust and uncertainty behind. After that, the days felt borrowed. Neighbors who rarely visited found reasons to pass by. A wagon lingered too long on the road. At night, the rancher heard sounds that made his hand drift toward the door latch. He did not tell the girl everything, but she felt it anyway. Fear had a way of leaking through walls. In quiet moments, memories rose for the rancher. He remembered losing a brother to a bad deal and a faster gun. He remembered choosing land over people because land did not betray you. Now he found himself choosing again, knowing the cost could be high. He watched the girl as she worked, her strength, her focus, the way she found joy in small victories. He wondered what kind of future he could offer if the past kept knocking. The girl had her own memories, heavy and sharp. She remembered the way silence could be loud when it was filled with threat. She remembered learning to read kindness in hands and faces. On the ranch, she found moments of peace she had never known. She fed the dog, tended the garden, learned the rhythm of days that did not end in shouting. She feared losing it more than she feared the men who wanted her back. One evening, as the sun bled into the hills, she took the rancher's hand and led him to the far fence. She pointed to the open land beyond, then to the house, then traced a circle in the air. He understood she was asking about staying, about belonging. He answered the only way he could, placing his hand over his heart and then over hers, a promise made without legal weight but heavy with truth. As darkness fell, a distant light flickered on the road, moving slow and steady. The rancher's muscles tightened. He counted the rhythm, the number of lanterns. He did not know if it was a traveler or something else. He turned to the girl and spoke her name, letting the sound carry warmth and warning together. She met his gaze, ready and afraid, and squeezed his hand once. Whatever was coming, it was closer now. The land held its breath, and so did they, standing together at the fence as the light drew nearer, carrying questions neither of them yet knew how to answer. The light on the road kept coming, slow and steady, until it broke into two lanterns swinging from either side of a wagon. The rancher did not relax. Wagons could carry trouble as easily as grain. He guided the girl back toward the house, his hand firm but gentle at her elbow. He spoke quietly, shaping words she could follow. He told her to stay inside, to keep the door barred unless he returned. She did not argue. She touched his sleeve once, eyes searching his face, then stepped back into the shadows of the room. The wagon rolled into the yard and stopped short of the porch. Two men climbed down, their boots heavy on the boards. One held a ledger tucked under his arm. The other kept his hands visible, palms open, a show meant to calm. They introduced themselves as agents, men who handled claims and contracts. The rancher listened, jaw tight. He asked who sent them. They answered with names that carried weight in town, names that leaned on the law without wearing its face. They spoke of agreements and obligations, of fathers and rights, of debts that did not disappear just because a man walked away from them. The rancher replied with facts. The paper was flawed. The girl worked by choice. There was no cause to take her. The men smiled thinly and said "'cause could be found when enough people wanted it." They asked to see her. The rancher said no. He stood square, shoulders broad, the house at his back. The men exchanged looks. The one with the ledger said they would return with stronger authority. He said it like a promise. When they left, the wagon wheels cut deep lines into the dirt. marks that stayed long after the sound faded. Inside, the girl waited, hands clasped. The rancher told her what he could without feeding her fear. She watched his mouth, catching words like return and town. She nodded, understanding enough. She moved through the house with purpose, gathering what mattered, a habit learned from nights when leaving was safer than staying. The rancher stopped her with a gentle hand. He shook his head, slow and sure. He told her they were not running. The next days were thick with waiting. Neighbors who had kept their distance now stopped by under thin excuses. A woman brought bread and stayed too long, eyes roaming. A man asked about fence repairs and lingered near the barn. The rancher answered politely, measuring each word. The girl stayed close, learning who could be trusted by the way their mouths moved and their eyes lingered. At night, the rancher planned by lamplight. He reviewed every paper he owned, every receipt and deed. He wrote letters to men who owed him favors, to veterans who remembered what it meant to stand for something when the ground shifted. He asked for statements, for witness, for time. He did not tell the girl everything, but she sensed the urgency. She helped where she could, sorting papers, copying words carefully, her handwriting steady with practice. A reply came from a man who knew the law better than most. He wrote that the contract could be challenged if proof of coercion existed. He wrote that testimony mattered. He wrote that the girl's own voice, however it came, would be important. The rancher read the letter twice, then handed it to the girl. He pointed to the lines that mattered. She read slowly, lips moving, eyes bright with focus. She began to prepare in her own way. She practiced writing what had happened, not with drama, just facts. She remembered dates by the seasons, by the crops, by the nights she slept hungry. She remembered the man's breath thick with drink, the way he pushed the paper toward her without looking. She remembered the nod she gave to the rancher, the first choice she had made in a long time. Writing it down steadied her. Another writer came, this one younger, nervous. He brought word that the drunk man had found money again and lost it just as fast. He brought word that the town was split, some saying the girl should be left in peace, others saying order must be kept. He brought word that a hearing was being arranged, informal but binding enough to settle things. The rancher thanked him and watched him go, feeling the clock tick louder. The night before the hearing, the rancher could not sleep. He sat on the porch, listening to the land. The girl joined him, sitting close enough to feel the shift of his weight. He spoke softly, telling her about the day he first took this land, about the mistakes he had made, about the promises he had kept to himself when there was no one else to hear them. She watched his mouth, then reached for his hand, holding it between both of hers. She pressed it to her cheek, grounding herself in the warmth. Morning came gray and heavy. They rode together toward town, the road stretching long. The rancher kept his eyes forward. The girl took in everything, memorizing the faces of the land as if it might be the last time she saw them. At the edge of town, they dismounted. The building where the hearing would be held was plain, its boards weathered by years of arguments and verdicts. Inside, the air was close. People filled the benches, curious and divided. The drunk man sat near the front, cleaned up but hollow-eyed. The agent stood nearby, ledger ready. The sheriff leaned against the wall, hat low. When the rancher and the girl entered, a murmur ran through the room. The rancher felt the weight of it, but he kept his posture steady. The hearing began with words that sounded important and felt thin. Claims were read. The contract was produced. The agent spoke of order and precedent. The rancher spoke of choice and safety. He did not raise his voice. He let the truth do the work. When it was time for the girl to speak, the room shifted. She stepped forward, heart racing. She could feel eyes on her, feel the press of expectation. The sheriff asked if she understood. She nodded. The rancher stood close enough that she could see his mouth if she needed to. She took out her paper, hand steady, and began to read. Her voice was soft, but the room leaned in. She told her story in simple lines, dates marked by seasons, facts set plain. She spoke of work and fear, of the nod she gave, of the peace she found on the ranch. Some in the room looked away, others frowned. The drunk man shifted, shame and anger crossing his face. When she finished, the sheriff asked questions slowly, making sure she could follow. She answered as best she could, using words and gestures together. The rancher watched, pride and worry tangling in his chest. The agents pressed back, questioning her understanding, her ability to choose. The rancher felt his temper rise, but he held it down. He knew this was the moment that mattered. The sheriff raised a hand, restoring order. He said the hearing would recess. He said he would consider what he had heard. He said the parties would wait. Outside, the air felt sharp. The rancher and the girl stood together, not touching, a shared space between them. People passed, whispering. The drunk man avoided their eyes. A woman from town approached the girl, offering a kind word, then another. Small signs, but they mattered. As the sun dipped, the sheriff emerged. He did not announce a decision. He said more review was needed. He said there were steps to take. He said everyone should return home and wait. The rancher felt both relief and dread. Waiting was dangerous. Waiting gave others time to move. They rode back in silence, the land darkening around them. Near the ranch, they saw a fire burning where it should not have been, low and smoky. The rancher's heart jumped. He urged the horse faster. When they reached the yard, they found a warning, nothing destroyed, just a message left in ash and broken wood. A line crossed the dirt, a claim made without words. The girl stared, fear and resolve mixing in her eyes. The rancher took her hand, steadying both of them. He spoke her name, slow and clear, letting the sound carry all the promise he could give. He told her they would face this together. He believed it, even as the night closed in and the land seemed to lean closer, waiting for the moment when everything would tip one way or the other. The warning in the dirt stayed with them through the night, but it did not break them. At first light, the rancher set to work repairing what had been disturbed, not to erase the message, but to show it had no power. The girl worked beside him, steady and focused. Each hammer strike felt like a small answer to fear. When the sun rose higher, neighbors began to arrive, drawn by word and worry. They did not come empty-handed. One brought fresh boards, another brought coffee and quiet support. The land felt less alone. By midday, the sheriff rode in, his face set with resolve. He dismounted and walked the yard, studying the marks left behind. He asked questions without hurry. The rancher answered plainly. The girl stood close, reading the exchange, her posture calm. The sheriff nodded and said the warning had crossed a line. He said intimidation would not stand. He said he had spoken to men in town who were ready to testify to what they knew. In the days that followed, the town shifted in small but important ways. The agents stopped coming. The drunk man was seen less and spoke quieter when he was seen at all. People who had watched from the edges stepped forward. A storekeeper signed a statement about the day the paper was pushed across the counter. A neighbor spoke of seeing bruises long before the girl came to the ranch. The truth gathered weight because many hands carried it. The hearing reconvened with more voices and fewer shadows. This time the sheriff read his findings aloud. He spoke of coercion and lack of consent. He spoke of a flawed contract and a father unfit to claim what he had already abandoned. He spoke of a rancher who had acted within the law and beyond it in the ways that mattered. When he finished, the room was quiet in a different way. The decision came clear and firm. The contract was void. The girl was free to choose her work and her home. Any further attempts to claim her would be treated as harassment. The words landed like rain on dry ground. The rancher felt his knees weaken, relief washing through him. He turned to the girl, searching her face. She was smiling, tears bright but not falling, joy contained and strong. Outside, the town did not erupt. It settled. People nodded, some offering hands, others offering space. The girl accepted both with grace. On the ride back to the ranch, the land looked wider than before, as if a horizon had moved. Life did not change all at once, it rarely does. But it changed in ways that lasted. The ranch grew steadier. Work became shared, without fear hanging over it. The girl continued to learn signs and letters, and the rancher learned patience in new forms. They found a teacher who visited once a week, a woman who knew how to teach through touch and sight, who treated the girl not as broken but as capable. Progress came in measured steps, each one earned. The rancher took on more help during the busy season, choosing hands he trusted. He made sure the girl's work was paid and her choices honored. She took pride in it, keeping careful records, learning numbers and names. She found joy in small things, the way seeds broke soil, the way a calf found its legs. She laughed more, a sound felt rather than heard, shared in smiles and light. One evening, as the sun lowered, the rancher sat on the porch and watched the fields breathe. The girl joined him, carrying 2 cups. She handed him one and sat close. He spoke her name, savoring the way her eyes lit. He told her he was glad she stayed. She placed her hand over his and nodded, then pointed to the land and to them both. Home did not need a single word. The town came to see her not as a story but as a person. Children learned to wave and sign. Adults learned to slow down and look. The sheriff stopped by now and then, checking fences and sharing news. The warning in the dirt faded with rain and time, replaced by grass that grew back stronger. Seasons turned. Winter came gentle and left without taking more than it gave. Spring followed with color. The rancher found himself planning not just for survival but for growth. He fixed the old barn roof. He planted more than he needed. He laughed once at a memory that used to hurt and realized it no longer did. The girl grew into her confidence. She spoke when she wanted and wrote when words were better. She learned that hearing came in many forms, that connection did not depend on sound alone. She taught the rancher this lesson without ever setting out to. Together they built a life that felt honest. On a clear morning, a letter arrived with the final seal that mattered. It confirmed the ruling, closed the file, and warned off any future claims. The rancher read it, then handed it to the girl. She read it slowly, then folded it and placed it in a small box with other papers that marked her journey. She smiled and tucked the box away, choosing not to carry the weight any longer. That night, they stood by the fence and watched stars come out one by one. The rancher spoke of plans, modest and real. The girl listened, then added her own with a careful smile. They did not rush. They had learned the value of time. Years later, people would say the ranch had changed them both. They would say the land taught them patience and courage. They would say a lonely place became a shared one because 2 people chose to listen in the ways they could. And if the wind ever whispered the old stories through wire and grass, it did so softly, as if satisfied to know that this one had found its ending, not loud or dramatic, but true and lasting.